Today, I'll be talking about the awareness and requital of grace, which is one of the four principles of Won Buddhism. Requital here meaning to repay, to give back in kind, to return grace for grace. I will be eventually referring to a handout that is in your booklet, so you may take that out at any time. And I believe that will be popping up online as well. Pause and think for a minute about the blessings you have received and how they generally work in this life. They come and they go. It's a simple fact that we experience every day, yet we often resist accepting it. Do you know the medieval depiction of the fortune's wheel? It's a wheel that's presided over by the goddess Fortuna, usually a king sitting at the top, complete with a crown and jeweled robe. At the bottom is a pauper in rags, skinny, struggling. Other people are clinging onto the sides as the wheel turns. The wheel is spun at random by Fortuna. This is a Western depiction of impermanence. Medieval writings about the wheel are really negative, so listen to this whining and complaining from Boethius. I know the manifold deceits of that monstrous Lady Fortune, in particular her fawning friendship with those whom she intends to cheat, until the moment when she unexpectedly abandons them and leaves them reeling in agony beyond endurance. This view of the world never really satisfied me, which is why I've been pulled toward a more Eastern way of interpreting the world and its mysteries. In fact, if we look at this continuing cycle of change through the view of understanding and requiting grace, it's an utter mind shift. So I'd like to suggest that rather than seeing the world as vindictive or capricious, that we see that it is in fact radiant, steadfast, impartial, and exceedingly just. It is full of grace. So the second principle of Won Buddhism tells us, the awareness of grace and requiting of grace means that we put gratitude into practice by deeply feeling and knowing the content of the grace we have received from heaven and earth, parents, fellow beings, and laws, and modeling ourselves wholeheartedly on that way. Even in a situation where we might feel resentful, we should discover the grace in that situation and respond with gratitude. This principle can therefore serve as a foundation for the way we live, not just as Won Buddhists, but as human beings trying to make our way as best we can through this dusty world. I see three components to this principle: understanding the grace that we receive, modeling our behavior on that way, and responding with gratitude. So first, understanding. As the principle states, deeply feeling and knowing the content of the grace we have received. But can we ever fully understand the magnitude of what we have been given in this human life? We're told it's extremely rare to be born human, even rarer to be exposed to Buddhism. So my answer for myself at this time in my practice is no. I can't possibly comprehend this grace. But I believe we can improve our understanding through awareness, through inquiry, and through faith. So starting with simple awareness, notice something you're grateful for and name it. The healing of a friendship, no longer having a fever, a stranger being kind to us, the exquisiteness of a tiny tree frog suctioned against the window, peppermint gum, anything. Once we're aware of this bit of grace, we label it, that's important, call its name out loud or in writing. It makes it a part of our conventional reality. Once it's named, we can give it more scrutiny if we need to, we can analyze it, we can meditate with it to otherwise bring it into our consciousness. So from awareness through labeling and meditation comes inquiry, gathering of information. We inquire into the nature of grace by studying scripture, listening to Dharma talks, talking with our Kamenims, sharing with our Sangha. We learn to know with a deep knowing that we can't exist without the air and earth and other living beings. Through daily journal writing, we assess our own actions to discern whether our behavior is mindful or unmindful. We notice when our actions are out of alignment with the way, when we're fighting against our original true nature. This is when we must sit in the discomfort and figure a way out. So now let's look at faith. Do you know the feeling when you see the fall leaves in color or see the immensity of the ocean and you feel like you don't have enough senses to take it all in? Your eyes are just not big enough and you feel like you need a new sensory organ or something. I have lived in many states from California to Connecticut, but there's no place with a more beautifully variable sky than North Carolina. I've looked up and not been able to comprehend the beauty of the white puff clouds lined up like obedient sheep, triangles of sunbeams piercing down through a purple and black stormy sky. It's just too much. So I just breathe and smile. This is the faith and the deeper knowing that we need in order to understand the nature of grace. So now let's move on to modeling ourselves wholeheartedly on the way of heaven and earth. This basically means the way of nature, and it is described in the scripture under the section called Agenda for Gratitude to Heaven and Earth, and this is your handout. The passage lists certain characteristics of this way, and then it explains how we can model ourselves after them. So when I first came across this passage, I felt like the top of my head had popped off. It's very cryptic, it's mysterious, it's beautiful. I didn't have much of a clue what it meant, but it drew me in, and I studiously wrote it down and have since written and thought about it many times. So I'm going to share some of that with you with the caveat that this is one practitioner's interpretation. Modeling ourselves wholeheartedly on the exceedingly radiant way. This is where we inquire and learn. So through our bright inquiry, we obtain intimate knowledge of the grace that we have received. It is also how we repay our teachers, by learning from them and modeling ourselves after them. The next one, exceedingly meticulous and steadfast. This is where we are consistent in our actions until we reach our goal. That seems pretty practical. And if we are meticulous and steadfast, we can think and speak and act in a way that serves everyone. Exceedingly just. Being just frees us from prejudice. We are judicious, not judgmental. We avoid strong attachments that make us lose perspective. And being just allows us to stick to the middle way. We can feel joy and sorrow, fear, excitement in the moment, but we don't try to chase after it or avoid it. Proper and natural. This is just a way of saying, be reasonable. It neutralizes our egos and it frees us from ignorance. Vast and immeasurable. This is where we move beyond partiality and learn to practice selfless service to others. Eternal and imperishable way. If we model ourselves after the eternal and imperishable way, this frees us to accept every change that comes our way, respecting, honoring, and welcoming each experience. So if you think of that fortune's wheel, not complaining or whining too much, just knowing that everything's going to change. Free from good or ill fortune, not getting sucked in by good luck, bad luck, remembering that everything changes, just keep moving through the good or bad period without getting stuck or perseverating on it. And the final one, free of thought in its applications. Here, we move beyond the picking and choosing mind the judging mind, and we approach enemies with no mind. We don't look for praise or reward when we are generous. We just do it and move on. This one is particularly helpful in relationships with other people, I find. Now that we've learned how we can choose to model ourselves after the way, the final step is to find grace from harm and respond with gratitude. This is the requital part. Is it possible to find grace in harm? The Dalai Lama, in his guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, explains, when we think of someone who has wronged us, our minds, which were at peace just a minute before, suddenly become slightly agitated. It is this initial unsettled feeling that we need to immediately address. And he goes on to state that if we do not intercept this unsettled feeling, it can feed our hatred, causing it to grow and do great damage. While the person who hurt us may have had other reasons for what he did, the Dalai Lama states that from the moment hatred appears, it exists for the sole purpose of harming us. So we need to confront it with all the means we have. This isn't easy, but it is necessary. Our egos are going to fight back, saying, hey, this person hurt me. I should feel resentful. I should feel angry. Or we might actually have an attachment to our feelings of victimhood. That serves the ego quite well. But we're not here to serve our egos. For me, grace from harm was an expedient mantra that gave me permission to let go of negative emotions. When I first read this phrase, grace from harm, and studied it in Dharma class, it felt almost like a remembering, like, oh yeah, this is how to do it. I'd forgotten I didn't have to hold on to pain. And one thing I'll always be grateful for, one harmful thing I will always be grateful for, is the day I learned I was being let go after 10 years in a company. The news came out of nowhere, although I should have seen the signs. My ego told me quite confidently that I was untouchable. And that day, my ego went from being as big as my corner office to a tiny and hurt, confused little thing. But that day also sent me straight as an arrow to the Won Buddhist temple, and I've never looked back. Grace from harm. So, rather than increasing our suffering by fueling resentment, we can use it as a tool to open the door of gratitude. I'd like to end with a quote. I found this in my journal dated December 12th, 2019. Don't forget the energy of heaven and earth. Make use of it when you're able. There is power in the moon, in rocks, in ginkgo leaves, in snow and ice, and in all things under heaven and on earth. Trust in that energy and in the strength that comes from your practice. Be humbled by grace and be empowered by grace. Thank you.